People think the hardest part of starting over is learning a new job. They're wrong. The hardest part is realizing the one person you shouldn't fall for is the only one who ever really sees you. When I transferred to the Coastal Search and Rescue Unit, I thought I was escaping burnout. New town, new station, less chaos than the capital. At least that's what I told myself. The harbour smelled like salt and diesel when I walked into the operations building that first morning. Radios crackled softly, boots echoed on metal flooring, and everyone already seemed to know exactly where they belonged. I didn't. Commander Ionescu barely glanced up when I signed in. "You'll be paired with Senior Navigator Luca, Doc B. Briefing's already done." That name stuck in my head. Petrescu. I'd heard it during training. The quiet guy who never lost a vessel, never panicked in storms, and never stuck around for after-shift drinks. I found him exactly where they said he'd be. Already inside the rescue boat, hands on the console, eyes on the water, like he'd been there for hours. Early 30s maybe, lean build, dark hair swept back by the wind. His expression was calm in a way that didn't feel relaxed, more like someone who'd trained himself not to react. "You the transfer?" he asked without turning. "Yeah, Adrian Voss." He nodded once. "Life jacket before stepping aboard? Radio check every departure." No handshake, no smile, just procedure. We pulled away from the dock in silence. The first patrol was quiet enough to hear the gulls echoing across the water. Fishing boats drifted lazily near the horizon. A ferry cut slowly across the bay. The engine hummed steady beneath our feet. Luca didn't talk, didn't play music, didn't ask about my past assignment. Every so often, he corrected something calmly. "Keep your binoculars higher, you'll miss small signals." Log weather before we round the lighthouse. Not harsh, not cold, just efficient. By midday, I figured this was going to be one of those partnerships where the only conversation we'd ever have would be operational. I told myself that was fine. I'd had worse. The shift was almost over when the radio chirped. Possible capsized kayak near the southern reef. False alarm most likely. Still protocol. We reached the coordinates fast. The tide slapped against the rocks in uneven bursts. Luca cut the engine before we got too close. "Stay behind me," he said. I nodded. We searched for maybe 5 minutes before spotting it. A bright orange kayak wedged against the reef, half filled with water, and a teenager clinging to the rocks nearby, shaking from cold more than fear. Luca didn't rush, didn't bark orders, just moved steady, voice calm as he guided the kid onto the boat and wrapped him in a thermal blanket. By the time we returned to shore, the situation felt controlled, easy. As I stepped off the vessel, Luca stopped me. "You good?" I blinked. "Yeah, why?" "You froze for a second when the wave hit the hull." I rubbed the back of my neck. Just didn't expect it. He nodded. "First weeks are like that. Doesn't mean you're not cut out for it." That was the first time he sounded human. The second time came later that evening. We were anchored near the marina, waiting for clearance after a false distress flare report. He opened a storage compartment and tossed me a wrapped sandwich. "You eat?" "Not since morning." "Eat." We sat there in the rocking boat, the harbour lights flickering across the water like scattered gold. For a moment I looked over at him. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the shift, more like someone who'd been carrying something alone for too long. "Ever work with partners long?" I asked. He shrugged. "They don't usually stay." I didn't ask why, but something about the way he said it made me think the answer mattered. Weeks passed. Routine settled in, morning patrols, equipment checks, weather scans, late-night call-outs. Luca never became chatty, but the silence stopped feeling empty. It started feeling shared. He always knew when I was about to ask for coffee, always slowed the boat just enough when I needed to log coordinates. Never asked if I wanted to stop for food, just handed me something like it was understood. I caught myself watching him sometimes, the way he studied the horizon like it owed him answers, the way he kept one hand resting lightly near the throttle, even when the sea was calm, like he never stopped expecting things to go wrong. Everything shifted on a storm watch night. Rain hammered the deck. Wind dragged the water into uneven swells. We'd been assigned to standby near the northern buoy in case any fishing vessels got stranded. The cabin lights were dim. Rain drummed against the roof. I sipped from the thermos he'd passed me earlier. "Feels like the ocean's trying to swallow the town," I said. He smirked faintly.
"Seen worse. Bet you have."
Silence stretched. Then I asked, "You ever think of quitting?" He looked at me for a second. "Doing what?" "Anything. Teaching navigation, running charters somewhere warm." He huffed a quiet breath. "I'm not built for easy places." We sat there for another moment. Then he surprised me. "My brother was Coast Guard," he said. "Figured this was close enough without leaving home." I blinked. "My dad was rescue too," I admitted. "I thought the job would make me feel steady." "Does it?" "Some days." He nodded like that made sense. Then he asked quietly, "You got anyone waiting for you?" I shook my head. "No. You?" He hesitated. "Not anymore." That was all. But when he passed me another napkin, his fingers brushed mine, and neither of us pulled away immediately. After that, something lingered. Not obvious, just present. The real break came during a night rescue, distress beacon from an old trawler. By the time we reached it, waves were already slamming the hull sideways. The deck lights flickered erratically. I climbed aboard first. The deck shifted under my boots, and for one split second, I hesitated. Luca was beside me instantly, grabbing my harness and pulling me back from a loose railing that crashed down where I'd been standing. We stabilized the crew, called towing support, got everyone safe. But once we were back in our boat, adrenaline turned into something else. "What was that?" I snapped. "You hesitated. You yanked me like I was useless. You were about to get crushed. That's not your call to make." He stared at me then, jaw tight. "You don't get it." "Then explain it." For the first time since I'd met him, his composure cracked. "Because I can't lose another partner." The words hit harder than the storm. He looked like he wished he hadn't said it, but he didn't take it back. We barely spoke the rest of the shift, but everything had changed. A few nights later, after a quiet call-out that turned out to be nothing, he parked the boat at the far end of the harbour instead of docking. The water was still. City lights reflected in long, trembling lines. He shut off the engine. "You ever think about why I keep distance?" he asked. I shook my head. He exhaled slowly. 6 years ago, I had a navigator named Thomas. We worked together almost 4 years. He swallowed. Storm rescue went wrong. He went back inside the cabin for a passenger. I should have stopped him. Silence hung heavy. "He didn't make it," Luca said quietly. And I never told him how much he mattered before that night. The confession sat between us like something fragile. "I decided after that," he continued, "that it's easier not to let anyone close." I didn't say anything. "And then you showed up," he added, and suddenly the job felt less quiet. I met his gaze. "Maybe that's not a bad thing." He studied me for a long time, then slowly turned his hand over on the console, palm up. An unspoken invitation. I hesitated only a second before resting mine over his. No drama, no grand moment, just two hands meeting in the dark while the harbour breathed quietly around us. We never talked about it at the station, didn't need to, but the air between us softened. He laughed more, asked about my weekends, started leaving coffee at my console before I arrived. And one night, after a successful rescue involving a missing fishing boat, he asked, "You want to come over? Off duty, just food." I knew what it meant. I said yes anyway. His apartment was simple, clean, sparse, lived in. We cooked, talked, drank a little, and somewhere between the second glass and the quiet that followed, he looked at me and said, "I think I started falling for you before I realized I was allowed to." My heart slammed hard enough to make my chest hurt. "I think I did too," I admitted. When he leaned in, it wasn't rushed, just careful, like both of us understood what it meant. The kiss was soft, not dramatic, just right. Life didn't explode after that. No big reveal, No station drama, just quiet change. Shared shifts, shared meals, shared glances across the cabin when the radio crackled. One morning, watching the sunrise spill across the harbour after a long night rescue, he glanced over at me. "You still okay being my partner?" he asked. I smiled. "Only if I get to be more than that." He didn't answer right away, just reached over and squeezed my hand. And somehow, that was enough. If this story meant something to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? Because stories like this travel farther than we think.